Evening gathered over the plains like a held breath. Cottonwoods along the Cache la Poudre shivered silver on the underside. A line of fence cut the grass in a straight seam toward a low house and a long barn. A lantern glowed on the porch. A kettle hissed somewhere inside. June Avery stopped at the gate with the dust of Greeley on her skirt and a satchel pulled tight to her ribs. The wind smelled of hay and iron and horses. A man stepped into the doorway with an enamel mug cupped in one hand. He was broad in the shoulder, quiet in the eyes, the sort of quiet that comes from long days and long distances. She said barely above the wind, "I cannot have children." He looked past her to the pasture where four small figures chased each other around a salt block. His mouth shifted, not quite a smile. "Good. We have enough." He hooked the gate with two fingers and swung it open. He did not ask her name. He tipped his chin toward the porch. Steam drifted from the mug. The lantern burned steady. Inside smelled of coffee and clean wood. A pot clicked softly on the stove. June set her satchel on a chair and kept her gloves in her hands until the warmth reached her fingers. The man set his mug on the counter and turned the wick of a second lamp. "I teach reading," she said. "Writing. Numbers. I worked in a clinic a little. I can mend, if you want that." He nodded once. "Coal heart, June," she said. He nodded again, as if to say that was enough. He took a clean cup from a shelf, poured from the kettle, and placed it on the table in front of her. No speech, just heat offered. Footsteps thumped in the hall. The oldest boy appeared in the doorway with a rope over one shoulder and a face that had learned to measure men. Jesse Cole said, "Say hello." Jesse gave a nod that was almost a bow. A girl with a braid and the careful hands of a helper sidled in after him. Maggie Cole said, "Kitchen is not a parade." A smaller boy skidded on a loose board and wheeled his arms to keep from falling. Tommy June said before anyone else, and he grinned at the way his name fit in her mouth. He wore one boot backward. Last was a tiny thing with a soft mouth, a rag doll tucked under her arm and bare feet. She pressed the doll's button eye to her cheek and peered around the doorframe. Bertie Cole said, then looked to June. "She wanders at night sometimes." June crouched to Bertie's height. "Hello." Bertie did not answer. She leaned in, breathed in June's sleeve, then stepped back and hid behind the braid of her sister. The yard caught the last sheet of light. June carried the cup outside, sat on the step, and drew letters in the hard dirt with a twig. A, the shape like two fence posts with a line between. S, the snake that lives under the woodpile. The children drifted closer without plan. Jessie stood back but watched every move. Maggie traced a line with the edge of her shoe. Tommy copied the shape and turned the twig upside down when it worked. Bertie put her doll's face in the dust and left a round mark that looked like a moon. Cole moved in and out of the edges. He hauled a saddle to the porch rail. He checked a cinch. He did not interrupt. When Tommy held up a crooked O made of pebbles, Cole's mouth moved again towards something like a smile, then settled. The sun slid. The lantern on the porch became the first star. June set her cup aside and rose. "May I use the parlor for lessons?" she asked, "if I keep it tidy?" Cole glanced toward the front room where a narrow sofa sat under a window and a shelf of 24 books leaned in a tired row. A swallow's nest sat snug in the corner of the eave outside the glass. He lifted one shoulder in a yes that did not make a fuss of it. After supper, after hands washed in a tin basin, June heard the thin rip of thread from the porch. Cole sat on the step with Tommy's green checked shirt in his lap and a needle in fingers too big for the job. He pricked himself, winced, sucked the finger kept at it. June stood in the doorframe and watched without stepping in. The shirt was crooked but whole. "He likes that one," Cole said. "It suits him," June answered, and that was the whole exchange. The children were sent to bed down the narrow hall. Boards popped as the house cooled. June found the room he had given her just off the kitchen, the bed small and clean, the wall bare, save for a peg with a folded piece of patchwork hanging from it. The cloth was half sewn into a quilt that had more idea than finish. 4 squares were missing. Red thread spooled over the edge like a thin trail of something living. June touched the cloth with 2 fingers. The thread caught on the pad of her thumb and left a faint mark. Her eyes went to the doorway at a small sound. Bertie stood there in the dim with eyes open and seeing nothing. She walked past June and set her palm on the cool wood of the table. June lifted the child easily, felt the heat of a small body and the weight of trust, and carried her back to bed. Bertie's lashes trembled. Her mouth formed a sound without voice. June settled the blanket over her and tucked the rag doll tight against her arm. On the porch, the lantern hummed and threw a small circle that felt like an invitation. Out in the field, cricket started and stopped like the practice of a band that has not yet agreed on a tune. June stepped outside and let night air cut through the leftovers of a long road. The kettle hissed again, as if to say nothing terrible had happened yet. She stayed on the top step and tried to learn the ranch by ear. The wind pressed against the barn and then let go. Somewhere a rope slapped wood. A horse stamped once. Inside a chair leg scraped. Birds turned in their nests. Farther off she heard a sound that did not belong to the place. The slow creak of leather and the small paper whisper of something folded and refolded. A rider sat at the far fence facing the house, only a shape between darker shapes. He took a sheaf from his pocket. The night carried the neat complaint of paper as he flattened it against his knee. He turned the horse and moved along the fence until brush and darkness swallowed him. June did not move until the sound of hooves and paper went with him. Morning came without asking permission. Cole had already cracked ice from the pump and set the kettle to sing. Coffee lifted through the room like a promise. He left a bottle of warmed milk wrapped in cloth near the stove. No note. He never used notes. June tied up her hair and found a stick with a good point. She drew lines in the dust again. This time Jessie brought a crumpled map from a drawer and asked without looking at her if the river on the paper was the same river that ran behind the alfalfa field. She showed him the bend, the ford, the way the road pulled away, and then returned. Maggie read the labels haltingly and pressed her lips together when she missed. Tommy spelled the name of the dog that had appeared 2 weeks back and never left a spotted creature Jessie refused to admit he liked. Bertie climbed into June's lap with the serious concentration of someone learning how to belong. By noon, the parlor was a school, the table an island of books and chalk and jar lids. June opened a shop ledger Cole had never used and started a list of sounds. S for saddle, P for pump, L for lantern. The light through the window warmed dust into a soft cloud that hung between their heads. Cole walked through once with a coil of rope over his shoulder. He paused at the sight of the 4 heads bent toward the page, and June's hand steady between them, then moved on. He came back an hour later with a broken bridle and set himself in the doorway, as if the room were a scene he did not mind being painted into. Jessie's mouth softened. Maggie's shoulders dropped. Tommy stopped talking quite so loud. Bertie pressed her doll's faded face to June's arm and gave a sigh that sounded like an answer to a question no one had spoken. Outside the fence line buzzed with heat. In town, a different kind of heat gathered. A clerk at the county office licked a finger to separate papers and squared the stack. He inked a stamp set a page beneath his palm and brought the block down. The mark bled clean and red onto the sheet. Weld County Welfare. The paper lay there neat in its language, ugly in what it could do. The clerk reached for an envelope. Snowmelt still ran loud in the side ditches when the day went wrong at the cattle gate. Morning had been steady. Coffee breathed through the kitchen. The kettle sang and went quiet. Jessie carried a bucket to the pump, set his shoulder against the handle, and worked the iron up and down. Tommy chased the spotted dog that pretended not to care. Maggie checked the hinges at the pen, careful hands turning a nail with a bit of cloth. Bertie sat on the step in a patch of light and let ants climb her bare toes. June stacked tin plates to dry. The window gave her a slice of the yard like a photograph. Cole crossed from barn to fence with a roll of wire and a hammer. His coat was open to the sun. He did not look in the window. He did not need to. The house moved around him like a thought he had already had. A calf bawled somewhere behind the barn. Maggie turned her head to listen, and her braid caught the hinge. It was a small twist of hair, a small pull of metal, a sound no louder than a match being struck. The gate slipped and came down on her forearm. She hissed. The sound was short. Jessie dropped the bucket and ran. Cole was already turning. June was faster than both. She had the apron off before the gate settled. She slid her arm under the plank and lifted the weight enough for Cole to shove a broken post under as a brace. The skin along Maggie's forearm had a pale dent wrong in its angle. The girl's breath came fast and sharp. She would not cry with the others standing there. "Look at me," June said, and Maggie did. "We need it straight." "Can you do it?" Cole asked, his voice steady against what moved behind it. 2 straight pieces, June said. From the apple tree would be good. Cole tore a fence slat in 2 with a rip of old wood and put the pieces in her hands. Jessie pressed his lips thin and held the girl's shoulder the way a man would. Tommy stood off with fists closed and the dog leaning into his knee. Bertie's doll dropped in the dust. June cut her apron into bandages with her teeth and a small knife. She wrapped the first strip under the break, and above it her hands soft and quick. The sun bounced off the nail heads. The smell of iron and old sweat lifted from the plank. A fly found the salt at Maggie's temple. June brushed it away with the back of her wrist. "This will hurt," June said. "You are brave enough." Maggie nodded once. June set the slats and tied the strips tight and even. The girl went white for half a blink and then breathed again. June smoothed a strand of hair behind Maggie's ear and hummed one low note that settled the others as much as the girl. Cole let the plank down. His hands stayed close without touching. "She needs it high for a few days," June said. "Cool cloth. Tincture if we can find it." Cole dipped his head. "I can ride to town for willow bark." June shook her head. "I have some." She went for her satchel without hurry. Inside the kitchen, she washed her hands in cold pump water and watched the red give way to clean. By noon, Maggie was on the sofa with the arms set on a pile of folded shirts. Tommy brought her a tin cup of water and did not spill. Jesse sat on the floor with a map spread over his knees and read road names under his breath. Bertie climbed into June's lap with her doll and breathed the cotton at June's neck like a scent she wanted to learn. Cole worked in the doorway with a rope coiled at his feet, a shadow cut against the brighter room. His face was flat and careful. "Thank you," he said. June poured him coffee. "She is a strong one." "She is," he said, and left it at that. Word moved at the pace of small towns. Mrs. Whitcomb stopped her wagon by the fence in the afternoon and handed down a loaf wrapped in paper. For the little soldier, she said, chin toward the house. Her eyes cut to June's hands, quick and approving. "If a letter from me helps you ask." She flicked the reins before June could answer. At dusk, Pastor Keene walked in from the road with his hat in both hands. He stood on the porch and squinted into the house as if light itself made him cautious. Cole met him in the doorway. No one asked him inside. He did not seem to expect it. "Just checking on you," he said, eyes slipping to Maggie's sling. He nodded to June and was gone the way he came. The day folded itself, then unfolded again. In the lull after supper, the wind lost its warmth. The animals lifted their heads and turned toward the river, as if they had all agreed to listen at once. June brought the patchwork from its peg and sat on the edge of her bed. She did not stitch. She only ran a finger along the edge where one square should be, and then set the cloth back and went to look in on the children. Bertie slept with her mouth open and her hand on the doll's button-eye. Maggie snored just a little in a way that was almost a laugh. Jesse lay with one arm over his face as if the day had been too bright. Tommy clutched a stick of chalk like a prize and would not let go even in sleep. A horse came in from the road sometime after full dark. June heard leather and the small clink of hardware, then a firm knock that played polite only at the surface. Cole opened the door before the second knock landed. A man stood on the stoop with dust on his boots and a long coat that carried town air into the house. "Mr. Dunn," Cole said without warmth. "Mr. Hart," the man answered, and he took off his hat only after he had stepped into the lamplight. His hair lay where the hat had pressed it. He was the kind of tidy that wanted to be seen. He held a folder flat in one hand, its corners sharp. He looked around once and took in the table, the clean floor, the bandage on the girl. His face did not change. June stood by the stove with a hand on the kettle handle. She did not move it. She did not move herself. "I am here on county business," Mr. Dunn said. "There has been a complaint. 4 minors residing here. None share your name. There is no legal guardianship on file." Cole's jaw tightened once and let go. "They have a roof and work and lessons." "That is not the file," Mr. Dunn said. He opened the folder with care and did not offer the paper to anyone. "You have 10 days. Denver House of Mercy is prepared to receive them. I will return." When he closed the folder, it made a soft clap, lighter than a book, heavier than a hand. He put his hat back on and went down the steps. June watched him walk to his horse. He paused at the fence to fold the paper again and again until it sat thin as a pocket knife. Cole closed the door and leaned his back against it. The house held a new kind of quiet, like a held note no one had chosen to sing. June went to the table and pulled a chair in under her. She brought out a sheet of paper and a small bottle of ink from her satchel. She trimmed the point of a pencil with a paring knife and set the curl of wood aside. Her hand made slow lines at first, then clean ones. "Mrs. Whitcomb," she wrote, "Pastor Keene, Dr. Ruiz, Mr. Olson on County Road 5. Names became sentences. Sentences became testimony. Cole sat across from her and said nothing until her second page. "Spell it out," he said. "Do not be careful with them." "I will not," she said, and did not look up. Jesse came to the doorway of the kitchen and did not come in. "Are we going?" he asked, voice made flat so it could stand upright. "No," June said. "You are not." He nodded as if that were a thing a person could decide. He went back to the hall. Cole watched him go. By morning the wind had teeth. June walked into town with letters in a cloth bag against her ribs, counting each step like a measure. She left one at the store. Mrs. Whitcomb took it without reading and put it in a drawer. She left one at the church. Pastor Keene took it and did not meet her eye, then cleared his throat and wished her a good day. She left one at the doctor's office. Dr. Ruiz looked down the hall and then up the street and then back at her and said he would do what he could. When she turned back toward the ranch, the sky had settled into a hard gray. The light felt lower than it should. On the bridge across the Cache la Poudre, she stopped and looked down. Water shouldered past the pilings high for the season, dark with carry. One plank on the far side had lifted. It tapped its nail with a sound like a spoon against a cup and then let go into the current. Behind her, the kettle at Hart Ranch would come to a singing boil. At the fence line, a whole line of sparrows had gone quiet. A low roll of thunder walked in from the west and sat down without apology. The lantern on the porch waited for night. By dusk, the west turned the color of a bruise. Heat bled out of the grass. The lantern on the porch lifted its small circle and held it steady. In the parlor, Maggie slept propped on folded shirts, the splint clean and tight. Jessie checked the knot again and pretended not to. Tommy lined buttons in a crooked row on the floor. Bertie leaned quiet against June's shoulder and had stopped humming. June touched the child's forehead and felt a heat that did not belong to the day. The skin was dry and bright. Bertie blinked slow and heavy. Her breath ran shallow. June rose with the girl in her arms and the doll trapped between them. She set Bertie on the sofa, fetched a basin, and dropped a few leaves into the water to loosen their scent. Mint lifted into the air and tried to cover the metal taste of worry. Cole, she said not loud. He was already at the doorway. He put his hand on the child's shoulder and left it there a long second. He spoke as if talking to himself. She ran hot once before and let it go. "This is more," June said. The words came even. "There is a kid at Dr. Ruiz's office you told me about. You said he keeps one for nights." Cole's eyes flicked to the window. On the glass, a line of dust drew itself as wind started to work along the eaves. "Water is high." "I saw the plank go," June said, "on the far side of the bridge." He stood still in the doorway. The room held its breath with him. Jessie looked up. Maggie shifted and grimaced in sleep. Tommy sneezed and startled at his own sound. "I can ride," Cole said. "I know the ford below the mill. If he cannot come, I can bring what he keeps." June wrung the cloth and set it on Bertie's head. She did not look at him. "Go." He nodded once. He crossed to the peg, lifted his coat, and tied the oilskin close at the neck. He took the old kerchief from the table and shoved it in his pocket without folding it. He reached for his hat and paused. His hand opened and closed. He touched the back of Bertie's small hand with one finger and the edge of June's sleeve with the other. Then he was out the door and into the dark that was already beginning. The house changed shape at night. Boards made answering sounds to each other. The stove ticked and cooled and then ticked warm again. Rain came first in separate notes, then a steady line. Thunder rolled in and sat over the roof like a heavy man who would not be moved. Jessie walked the length of the room and back hands behind his neck. Tommy wedged himself under the table with the dog who accepted the job of being leaned on. Maggie woke, swallowed a cry, and bit it off. June laid another wet cloth across Bertie's chest and watched the rise and fall. She could feel the heat through the cloth and the way the breath fluttered like a trapped moth. "Talk to me," she told the girl. "Tell me anything." Bertie made a shape with her mouth that might have been a name. Her eyes slid past the ceiling and saw something behind it. June pressed her palm to the child's sternum and sang a low line with no words. Out in the dark, Cole leaned into the wind. The horse picked its feet where it could feel ground. At the mill, the river shone flat and black and then lifted white over rock. He kept to the left bank where the willows dragged and bent. When he turned toward the ford, he saw the missing plank of the bridge caught against a piling and then torn loose again. The sound of water was a long, unbroken thing. He put his knees to the horse and felt the animal gather under him. Cold grabbed him at the thigh and pulled. He slid his weight back and let the horse find the bottom. The current shoved him 2 steps sideways and then another. The saddle lifted and dropped. He pulled for the shallows where the river slowed at a log jam that had been there since spring. The horse found gravel. When they climbed the far bank, the animal shook itself and sent water in a circle. Cole felt the wet in his boots and the stiff cold in his pant legs and did not think about either. The lights of Greeley were thin and careful. Dr. Ruiz's office was a narrow space between a dressmaker and a feed store. Cole rattled the door and heard a voice from the back room swear softly. The doctor opened with a lamp held at shoulder height and a book held beneath the lamp to keep the flame steady. He took one look at Cole and did not ask questions he could not waste time on. "Little one," Cole said. 3 years, fever sudden, breath fast. Ruiz set the lamp on the counter and reached for his bag. He moved with the neat economy of a man who had learned to be useful in a hurry. He added a leather roll to the bag and a stoppered bottle and a cloth wrap. "Horse can take 2 if you brought a second," he said. "I did not," Cole said. "River is out of its manners. I can lead one for you." Ruiz blew out the lamp and locked the door. "I will ride mine. You set the pace." Back at the ford, the water felt colder. The doctor cursed when his boot filled and then shut his mouth and let the horse do the work. Cole went ahead and turned in the saddle to mark where the dark read as less dark. They came up dripping and hard of breath and got the rest of the way at a trot. June heard the hoofbeats as a change in everything else. She set the basin aside, moved to the door, and opened it before the knock. Cole stood there with water running off his hat brim and dirt on his jaw like paint. Ruiz pushed past him and went to the girl without ceremony. He set the bag down and untied it. He checked the pulse at the throat and under the wrist. He nodded once and made a sound June could not place. He uncorked the bottle and set 2 drops on the child's tongue, then more on a cloth that he laid against the chest. He sent Jesse to boil the kettle again and sent Tommy under the table out to the porch to fetch the second pail without slopping. He asked June for her neatest strip of linen. She handed him her last clean handkerchief. He tore it and knotted it in a way that made a little tent over the child's mouth. The rag caught the wet of her breath and warmed it back to her. "Sit with her," Ruiz told June. "Let her listen to your lungs. Let her follow that." June settled into the sofa corner with Bertie across her lap. The child's skin was hot and strange, all angles and weight. June let her own breath widen and slow. She counted it without counting. She felt the tiny chest learn. Cole stood a step behind, wet dropping to the floor and making small lakes at his heels. Ruiz glanced at the coat and the puddle and shook his head once and let the man stand where he was. The doctor gave directions in short lines. Cool the head and chest. Warm the feet. Keep the room quiet. Watch for the shift. He stayed until the air in the house changed, which it did a little after dawn. When it came, the change was not loud. Sweat showed at Bertie's hairline. The grip of her small hand on June's cuff loosened. Her mouth softened. The red in her cheeks faded to a normal wrong-for-sleep pink. Her breath evened and lengthened in a way that did not ask anyone to count it anymore. "She is through the worst," Ruiz said. He scribbled a line on a scrap and handed it to June. "If the heat returns, mix this again. Small sips. Take the day as if it is fragile." He packed his bag and put a hand on Cole's shoulder in a brief human way. Then he took his hat, found his horse, and was gone into a morning that had the gray of pewter. Cole sat down in the chair by the door and slept as if felled. His coat was half off and the collar twisted. His hand hung open at his side like it had dropped whatever it had been holding all night. June covered him to the ribs with the piece of patchwork that still had its loose edges and did not think about what that meant. It was the sound of boots on the step that woke him. He sat up, pushed the patchwork aside, and stood by habit before he was fully awake. Mr. Dunn came in behind another man who did not speak. They took off their hats and held them against their chests as if the air inside asked for that much respect at least. "We have received letters," Dunn said, "from the town, from the church, from Dr. Ruiz. The office has issued a temporary rescind of the removal order, pending final review." He held out a sheet with the county seal pressed at the bottom. The ink had not dried a full hour before. Cole looked at the paper and did not take it. June stepped forward and did. Her hand was steady. "What does it mean?" Jesse asked from the corner. He had come in with his hair stuck in sleep and his jaw set for bad news. "It means you stay," June said. "For now." Dunn nodded once. "I will report that you were notified." He put his hat back on and went for the door. The silent man did the same. Dunn paused on the stoop. He glanced at the porch light that was still burning in the morning and then at the girl on the sofa. He made no remark and left. Cole exhaled in a way that emptied him and then let air back in. He looked at June and then at the paper in her hand. He looked at the children and then at the floor. He rubbed the back of his neck. His mouth twitched once and stilled. Bertie turned her face into June's shirt and slept with her whole weight given. June sat there until her leg went numb and did not shift. The kettle sang again and no one rushed to lift it. When she finally stood, she set the paper on the table and smoothed the corner with a thumb. The seal caught the light and sat there like a coin on a windowsill. In town, a clerk opened a drawer and removed a heavier folder. He set it on the desk and squared it. He pressed a fresh ribbon of wax across the edge and warmed the county seal in his hand before he reached for it. The stamp lay ready, its face turned up to the light. The official paper came on a clear morning that looked simple, and was not. A county rider turned into the yard with his scarf pulled to his chin. He slid from the saddle, touched his hat, and held out an envelope with a seal the color of dried blood. Cole stood at the bottom of the steps and did not reach for it. June did. The wax had a neat impression. The paper held the smell of ink that had not yet settled. June broke the seal with her thumbnail and read without clearing her throat. "Legal guardianship confirmed," she said. "Cole Hart, sole guardian. June Avery, co-caretaker responsible for instruction and welfare." The rider waited without expression. Cole looked at June, then at the kids who had formed a crooked line on the porch. Jesse's jaw unclenched. Maggie shifted the sling and lifted her chin. Tommy blinked hard and did not hide it. Bertie put her hand on June's knee like she wanted to anchor both of them to the step. "Thank you," Cole said to the man, as if the rider had done more than carry a thing. The man tipped his hat again and left by the way he came. Dust lifted, then lay back down. June set the paper on the table and smoothed the corner. She went to the peg by her bed and brought the patchwork into the kitchen light. She threaded the needle with the red spool that always wanted to tangle and pulled the first missing square into place. Her hands worked quiet, the needle slipping in and out the thread, leaving a line that had not been there before. Cole watched without trying to look like he was watching. The kettle began to sing and filled the room with the warm smell that always meant there would be enough for everyone. Winter had a quick temper that year. Frost ate the edge of the water trough before the pumpkins were gone from the porch. By the second week, the ground had the sound of iron. The alfalfa was under white. Hens huddled in corners. Feed sacks felt light no matter how a person lifted them. Coal in the bin dropped a level that did not match the number of buckets that came out. "We will go to Olson's," Cole said not loud. "He owes me." June wrapped Jesse's scarf twice and tucked the end under his collar. She set bread and jerky in a cloth and handed it to Cole. Her hand stayed on the cloth a second longer than the handoff needed. 2 days, Cole said. He did not promise. He set his palm on the top of Jesse's head, then took it away. They rode out under a sky the color of tin. The wind turned mean after noon. By evening, snow found every crack and made it bigger. The lantern on the porch burned steady and small. June chopped wood until her knuckles split and left thumbprints on the handle. She kept the fire regular. She braided Maggie's hair with the good hand and tied it off with a strip from an old shirt. She sent Tommy to check eggs he knew would not be there, just so he would step and come back. Bertie tried to sleep and could not, so June laid the child on her own bed and put a warm brick at her feet. The second day slid by on the same rails. The third took the edge off June's patience and then off her fear and left something bare that was harder to carry. She did not sit unless she had to. The dog paced the door and growled low at nothing. The cows walked the fence line and made circles in the snow that looked like writing. The house held. Before dawn on the fourth morning, hoofbeats found the porch. June was up before the sound finished. She threw the door and let the cold slap her awake. Cole stood there with snow on his eyelashes and mud at his knees, one hand on Jesse's collar to keep the boy from sliding sideways off the saddle. Jesse's lips were pale, and the breath in his chest came in small, hard pulls. Inside, June said, "Now." She stripped the coats as they crossed the threshold and shoved them at the peg. She shoved a chair to the stove and pushed Jesse into it. She sent Maggie for the quilt from the foot of her bed and told Tommy to bring the bucket from the porch and not to run. She laid Jesse's feet into warm water and rubbed the color back with a cloth until it burned. She cupped his cheeks and made him look at her so his eyes would have a place to land. "Sorry," Jesse said, small. "I tried to keep up." "You did," June said. She kissed the corner of his mouth like it would not embarrass him if she missed the aim by a little. "Drink." She put a mug between his hands. He gripped it with a care that looked like prayer. Cole stood by the door with his body telling him to stay up and his legs answering no. June took the towel from the peg and threw it across his shoulders. He stood there with steam coming off him in strips water, making a lace under his boots. "Sit," she told him, "please." He obeyed the pleas and dropped into the chair with a sound that might have been relief if it had been longer. His hands were careless with the kind of tired that comes after a thing is survived. June poured coffee, and the smell cut through the wet wool and the barn on his coat. He took the cup and held it without drinking, exactly as if the heat alone would return him to himself. When the house had air again and the blood had come back to Jesse's fingers, June went soft at the knees and had to sit. She put both hands flat on the table and stared at a knot in the wood until it looked like a small river on a map. Cole watched her from the chair. His coat was off now. His shirt had dried in patches that made no pattern. His hair stood up where he had pulled it. "You scared me," she said. Her voice sounded like it had walked a long way. "I know," he said. He set the cup down and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. He looked at his hands, then past them. "I went out because I had to. I came back because here was here." June shook her head once and then stopped so it would not turn a no into more than it was. "I thought I had been chosen for all the wrong losses," she said. "I did not expect to be chosen for a door someone would walk back through." He looked up at that and held her eye like a man learning that a room has a window he had not seen. Steam climbed from the kettle and blurred the edge of his jaw. The clock on the shelf ticked like small hooves. The house was warm enough that it felt like luck. "I am not much for arranging words," he said. He stood and came to the table and put his rough hand on the red thread June had left near the quilt. He did not touch her hand. He touched the work. "June, I do not want you to teach them anymore." Her breath caught. She let it go. "I want you to raise them with me," he said, "as their mother, as my wife." The room did not tilt or glow. It held. June looked at the quilt. 4 squares filled. 4 had been missing when she first saw it. She picked up the spool of red and set it in his palm. "Then finish this with me," she said. She turned the quilt so the last empty square lay closest to him. "Tie a knot I cannot pull loose." His mouth made a shape that was almost a smile and then refused to be called that. He took the needle. His fingers were too big but not useless. He set the tip and drew the red through with a sound that felt like a promise without show. The lantern on the porch burned while he worked. The children lay under blankets down the hall. The dog shifted and settled and snored with drama under the table. June stood beside him. Her shoulder touched his arm once when she leaned to set the edge straight. He did not move away. The thread went in and out and in again. He tied the knot. It sat small on the cloth and did not look like anything other than what it was. That night, the light on the porch stayed on longer than usual. The snow at the threshold melted in a dark half-moon. The kettle sang again and again, and no one minded the repetition. Maggie slept with her splint propped high. Jessie slept like someone who had done a hard thing and would not talk about it. Tommy mumbled about a horse with no name and rolled into the warm spot Bertie left when she crawled into June's bed and fell asleep across the bottom like a cat. In town, a fire threw light against the black windows of a forge. A hammer rose and fell in a steady count. Sparks jumped and went out where they landed. On the anvil lay 2 thin bands bright as pennies. Steam lifted when the metal touched water and wrote a message on the cold air that only held for a breath. Spring came quiet, not with a shout, but with a soft loosening. Snow pulled back from the fence posts. Water ran brighter in the ruts. The cottonwood behind the house lifted first leaves the size of a thumb and shook them like coins. The yard smelled of damp earth and lilac. The porch boards lost their winter creak and learned a kinder sound. Neighbors came down the lane in 2s and 3s and set chairs in the grass. Mrs. Whitcomb carried a loaf wrapped in a towel and a jar of lilac stuck with care into a tin cup. Pastor Keene arrived with his hat in both hands and the look of someone who would not mind work if it was human. Dr. Ruiz tied his horse to the fence and tightened the knot twice, as if to tell the animal to behave. Cole stood under the cottonwood in a clean shirt and a vest that had seen oil and now saw sun. He had shaved close and missed one small place near the ear. His boots were brushed. He touched one hand to the back of the other as if to get the last of the dust off and then stopped touching things. June came out from the house with her hair pinned and a dress that made a soft sound. The lace at the throat was old and mended. The skirt caught at the same splinter on the step that caught every skirt, and she lifted it without breaking stride. Jessie took her right hand. Maggie took her left. Tommy walked a step ahead and kept his back straight in a way that was trying hard. Bertie carried the rings on a bread plate and watched her feet in serious silence. The dog paced the edge of the chairs and pretended to be useful. They stopped under the tree. The wind went slow through the first leaves. Someone in the back sniffed and blamed the lilac. Pastor Keene opened his book and closed it again and set it on a chair. He cleared his throat and looked at June, then at Cole, then at the children lined up like a story that had needed telling. "I will not use many words," he said. "You two have already done the hard part." He turned to Cole. Cole took June's hands. His palms were rough warm where the sun had found him. He did not look at the people or at the preacher or at his boots. He looked at June. His voice landed in the space between them. "I cannot promise easy days," he said. "I can promise that when you wake, this place will be here needing you, wanting you. I can promise I will come in the door with work on me and lay it down." June did not answer in a rush. She smiled in a way that turned small at the edges and reached into her pocket and drew out the spool of red thread. She wound a length around the handle of the lilac and tied a knot that held. Her lips moved, but only to breathe. She pressed the bouquet into Maggie's good hand and held out her left hand for the ring. Bertie lifted the plate to the level of her chin. The rings lay there, simple circles, bright as pennies. Cole picked one up with both thumb and forefinger, careful like he handled a newborn calf or a glass lamp. He set it on her finger. It slid home and stayed. She took the second ring and set it on his. His knuckle was bigger than the band had believed it would be. It learned and moved. The preacher nodded once and said what he needed to say. It was nothing fancy. The crowd let breath go. Mrs. Whitcomb made a noise like a laugh and a cry mixed and said she had a pie in the wagon and that it would not wait. The dog sneezed. Jesse wiped his eye with the back of his wrist and tried to make it look like a mosquito. Maggie lifted the bouquet and announced that the flowers smelled like rain and sugar. Tommy told Bertie she had done the plate right, and the girl accepted this as if no other outcome had been possible. There was bread on the table, and a stew that had waited at a low bubble and coffee with grounds that did not know when to settle. A knife clicked against a plate. A chair leg dug itself deeper into the soft ground and found purchase. Dr. Ruiz told a story about a farmer who tried to set a broken cow horn with a hairpin and a prayer and made everyone wince and smile. Cole cut the pie into 6 big pieces, and then 4 small ones, and then 2 to use up what was left. June tied the red thread around the handle of the kettle, then laughed once at herself and untied it and put the spool back in her pocket. After the neighbors left, the yard took its own voice again. The dog found the patch of sun that matched his length and owned it. The children ran a lap around the barn because the day wanted a lap. Cole picked up the chairs and carried them 2 at a time to the porch. June went inside and came back with the patchwork quilt. The last square was sewn. The red thread had been tucked and snipped. The cloth held mismatched years. There was a corner made from Tommy's old shirt, and one from a flour sack, and one from the hem Maggie had torn when she tried to climb a fence that did not wish to be climbed. June shook the quilt once, and let it fall across the bed so that it covered what needed covering. Days after that found a pace that felt like a song learned by ear. In the mornings, the kettle spoke first. Coffee put a soft hand on the kitchen. June set the ledger on the table and marked down the things to teach. Jesse brought the map and set his finger on the places where the road bent and asked why roads never go straight. Maggie sounded out words with a little weight on each syllable and then none. Tommy found a stick that made the right size letters in dirt and brought it to June like a gift. Bertie sat with her back against June's knees and traced the grain of the table and fell asleep there sometimes. Under the cottonwood, June propped a chalkboard between 2 barrels. Children from the lane came with eggs and a bar of soap and a paper bag of seed as if those were coins that bought numbers and letters. The wind kept the pages lively. June pinned them with flat rocks and a smile that fixed things. She showed a boy from downriver how to write his name the way his mother said it and not the way the county had spelled it on a form. She gave a girl the words to a song about a river crossing and listened when the girl got the notes right in her own way. Cole mended saddles on the porch with a strip of leather across his knee. He sharpened an awl and pushed it through and did not look up often. He traded a mare for seed and a promise and did not put the promise on paper. He took in a goat that had made a bad decision with a fence and returned it 2 days later when the animal had decided fences were friends. He watched Jesse work a knot twice and then watched him work it once. Maggie learned to tie her sling off with a piece of ribbon, and then she learned not to need it. Bertie left the bed every now and then at night and came only as far as the kitchen and laid a hand on the cool wood of the table and then went back under her own power. Tommy flew a kite made from a feed sack and a ruler and let the string burn his fingers because the sky wanted proof that he had held it. The lantern on the porch found its hour again. It lit at dusk without being told. Its circle on the step looked like the shape a person makes when a friend stands too close and is forgiven for it. June turned the wick high and then a little lower and set the glass straight. She did it without ceremony. The gesture felt like washing hands or tying an apron. The day made it right. On a late afternoon, when the light had a gold that belonged to no other season, June sat with the patchwork folded over her lap. She held a needle in one hand and a button from Jesse's jacket in the other. Cole sat on the step and cleaned a bridle with oil on a rag that had not been meant for that job, but did it well. The children played marbles and counted not for points, but for the satisfaction of watching the glass knock glass. The dog woke, barked once, and lay back down with a sigh that needed no reason. June looked out across the pasture to the river and watched the water move past the place where the plank had left in spring. She thought of a bridge that still held, because enough of it held. She threaded the needle without squinting, then set the button in place with 3 small stitches and a knot that would not pull loose. She bit the thread and smoothed the cloth with her thumb. She put the jacket on the back of a chair and patted it like it might stay, because it had been asked kindly. Cole glanced up without moving his head and spoke to the bridle as if it could carry words between them. "You look like home," he said. June did not answer with words. She set the needle in the cushion and went to the porch and turned the lantern to catch the first slip of evening. She touched the ring with her thumb and left a warm mark on the metal. The kettle hissed in the kitchen and talked itself into a boil. The smell reached them a breath later. Jessie called to Maggie to come see the color of the sky near the hill. Tommy said the dog had learned a new trick. Bertie laughed high and bright, and then went quiet because listening sometimes beat talking. The house held them in a way that felt honest. The quilt kept the bed. The red thread stayed where it had been told to stay. The lantern made its circle and did not ask for thanks. The river kept going because that was its work. The ranch settled, then lifted again with the next breath. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.